Some events in human history impact us so greatly that we will forever remember where we were, what we were doing when we heard the news. Most of us were in younger years when President John F. Kennedy was shot. We remember where we were. Most of us remember where we were when the Challenger exploded in space. Do you remember where you were when they began to broadcast that there was a plane I'm going to have a hard time making it through today. There was a plane that had flown into the World Trade Center, and then you were seeing smoke billowing up from the North Tower. And moments later, seeing the second plane crash into the South Tower. Today, 22 years later, we are still saddened by the tragic results of ruthless deeds that transpired, that happened on that dreaded day. Those who rushed into the Twin Towers, those whom we term first responders, on that faithful and tragic September morning, they did not die for us. They died for those they were trying to save and rescue. I think it is proper and fitting that we pause to reflect and remember the men and women who lost their lives on September 11th, 2001. This day was perhaps America's darkest day. Today we reflect on that horrible dark day when so many lost their life at the hands of terrorists. Those images are forever embedded in our minds. I have no pleasure in seeing that. Many images are in our minds in such a way that we can never unsee that image. Jesus used the fact of images to teach a lesson about our responsibilities to our country and to God. After being asked about whether they should pay tax, he said, "Show me the image on the coin." And when they did, he said, "Therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." We are to give the proper things to our country and the proper things to God. What are we to give our country? As we recited the Pledge of Allegiance this morning, we said that we pledged our allegiance to this nation. What does allegiance mean? Allegiance is loyalty or commitment of a subordinate to a superior or an individual to a group or a cause. And we individually proclaim our allegiance to the cause of democracy as still under experimental status in this country. First responders are those who have pledged themselves to serve and protect their neighbors in any and all situations. More often than not, they function as the Good Samaritan who came upon the man who had been beaten and robbed, left for dead on the side of the road. The man from Samaria did not know the individual, but he took care of him. Jesus used this as an illustration for us to know who our neighbor is. The Samaritan was able to see in that injured man an image of himself. That is how we should view all our neighbors, whether they live in our neighborhood or are far away from us. We should see ourself in them. Jesus said this is a commandment of great importance when he said, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." We're not to be like the Pharisee or the Levite who passed by on the other side of the road trying to ignore the plight of the robbery victim. They felt that their personal agenda was more important than helping that victim. First responders, while trained to be safe in their work, often must go beyond personal considerations in order to protect or serve their unknown neighbor. Some of you hearing me today have served on the front lines of protection for others. And though we or you may not still be doing so, we will forever be called to love our neighbor by meeting their need in the moment of our encounter with them. We don't necessarily jump at the sound of a siren or a whistle or a bell or an alarm. But when we encounter our neighbor, what is their need? We have pledged our allegiance, our loyalty, our willingness to go beyond the call of duty to our neighbor and to our country. So today we recognize and honor those who have made it their life's calling to do so. But for all of us, the immortal words of President Kennedy that he said on the day of his inauguration ring as true. They ring as true today as the day he said them. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. The first thing to do is to remember to pray for our country and its leaders, as we read in 1 Timothy. First of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. Is it possible? Consider for just a second. Is it possible that the problems we face in our country today could be related to a failure to pray for our leaders on a consistent basis? While Donald Trump was in office, there was a call for a national day of prayer for the president. I don't recall ever hearing that for Mr. Obama or President Biden. We pray for him, sure, but there has not been a national call to pray for our president by our faith leaders as they did for President Trump. We love to quote 2 Chronicles chapter 7 and verse 14, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will heal their land." We use that as a Band-Aid for our troubles. Every time it gets bad in society, we start seeing billboards and memes on internet and everything else. 2 Chronicles 7:14. But it's continued prayer for those with whom we disagree that seems to be out of our comfort zone. We would rather talk about our disagreement than our need for alignment before God. Is President Biden not our neighbor? Is he not created in the same image of God as you and I? Now, this brings us to the second part of the lesson that Jesus taught about our responsibilities. We are to give to God the things that are God's. If you'll allow me to stretch the story just a little bit, Jesus used the concept of an image on a coin to make his point. And just that image he carried on to surrender to God. The image on the coin teaches us about giving honor to our leaders on this plane of existence. And since Jesus used an image on the coin, it is fair to say that he was also considering the image on a man when he said to give to God what belongs to him. We are in the image of God. Therefore, what are those things in light of the image? First of all, it would be the same, if not greater, as what we give to our country. Allegiance, loyalty, commitment, honor. Just a few weeks ago, we asked the question here, have you given yourself to the Lord? Have you? Is your commitment to the Lord at least as strong as your commitment to yourself? We see this fulfilled by our first responders, even if they are not cognizant of their commitment in this area. That's what they do. Our commitment to God is revealed by our commitment to serving others who are created in that same image. Jesus tells a story in Matthew chapter 25, verses 34 through 40. He says, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me.'" They have accepted a calling of doing that on a regular basis. Whether they're consciously following a biblical principle or not, they are doing what Jesus said. What started out as a normal day for that Samaritan traveler suddenly changed when he came across his neighbor whom he did not know. His agenda got shifted. What started out as a normal day on September 11th suddenly changed for an entire nation. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, which would be the beginning of a chain of attacks on this country, which had for centuries enjoyed peace within its borders. In a matter of 90 minutes, 2,741 people who were husbands, wives, parents, children, lost their lives. This normal day became a day of sorrow and sadness, a day of regret and remorse, a day that we move from passiveness to prayer, a day that we were once again united and not a divided nation. Is that what it takes for us to be able to return to our beginnings? Must we always be forced to face a tragedy in order to bring us together? America went into a period of mourning. Flags were lowered to half-staff. Churches around the nation were filled with people praying, seeking reassurance, answers, comfort, hope from God in what seemed to be a hopeless time. It seems that we have lost that sense in the 20 plus years since that day. Now it is just something we recall once a year at this time. Must we be forced to face tragedy in order to be able to recognize that all humans are created in God's image? When a first responder arrives at the scene of trouble or tragedy, there is never the question of race, religion, politics, sexual orientation, gender preference, or any of the other things we like to use to divide us and separate us from others. They respond to human need. It should not take tragedy for us to respond to the need of others. This is how God created us, but religion has taken those things and made them as, quote, proofs that not everyone is created in God's image. We know that there was a time in our history in this country when the black man was not a human. Almost by decree. Religion should not be used in that way to prove that some are better than others. Whose image do you bear? Whose image does your neighbor bear? Does the answer to that question only come after you have determined some other aspect of the person in front of you? Fortunately for you and for me, for any other person who may be faced with a tragic situation in an unexpected moment, the one who shows up to help will not be hindered by such thinking. As we recall the horrific events from 22 years ago and the heroic response of so many who gave their lives in service to those whom they did not know, may we go from here today with a commitment to honor not only our first responders, but all who bear the image of God within their being.